In the heart of a forgotten valley, where mist clung to the earth like a lover's whisper, there lived an old woman named Elara. Her home was a crooked cottage, its walls woven from the roots of ancient oaks, and its roof a patchwork of moss and starlight. The villagers in the nearby hamlet of Thornwick called her the keeper of the grove, though none could say why. They spoke of her in hushed tones, their words a blend of reverence and fear, as if her very name might summon the wind or unravel the seasons. Ilara was old, older than the gnarled trees that guarded her grove, older than the stories whispered by the river. Her eyes, sharp as flint, held the weight of centuries, and her hands, gnarled as the roots she tended, moved with a quiet certainty. She wore a cloak of woven leaves, its edges frayed from years of wandering the forest, and her silver hair fell like a cascade of moonlight, unbound and wild. To the villagers, she was a relic, a figure from a time when the world still sang with magic. The grove itself was a place of secrets. Its trees stood taller than any in the valley, their branches interlocking to form a canopy that dimmed the sun to a soft, dappled glow. Flowers bloomed there that no botanist could name, their petals shimmering with colors that shifted in the light. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something sweeter, like honey left too long in the comb. No one ventured into the grove uninvited, for it was said that those who did never returned, or if they did, they were changed. Their eyes haunted, their words fragmented. Elara's days were spent tending the grove. She spoke to the trees as if they were kin, her voice low and melodic, coaxing them to grow, or soothing their ancient aches. She knew each root, each leaf, each hidden hollow where the spirits of the forest lingered. At night, she sat by a fire that burned without wood, its flames casting shadows that danced like memories across the cottage walls. She was alone, but not lonely. The grove was her companion, its whispers her lullaby. The villagers, though wary, sought her out in times of need. A child with a fever that wouldn't break, a crop that withered despite the rain, a heart broken beyond mending. They came to Elara, their offerings of bread or wool or polished stones left at the grove's edge. She never turned them away, though she rarely spoke more than necessary. Her remedies were simple but potent. A salve of crushed petals, a tea brewed from bark, but then a murmured word that seemed to hum in the air long after she'd spoken it. The villagers called these miracles, but Elara called them balance. The grove gives, she'd say, and the grove takes. One autumn, when the leaves burned crimson and the air grew sharp, a stranger arrived in Thornwick. He was young, with a scholar's ink-stained hands and eyes that burned with a hunger for answers. His name was Torin, and he carried a leather-bound book filled with maps and questions. He'd heard of the grove, of its impossible flora and the woman who guarded it. And he'd come to unravel its mysteries. The villagers warned him to stay away, their voices tight with unease. The keeper doesn't take kindly to outsiders, they said. She'll turn you to ash or root you to the earth. But Torin was not one to heed warnings. He believed in facts, in what could be measured and recorded, and he saw the grove as a puzzle to be solved. On a morning when frost laced the grass, Torin stepped into the grove. The air shifted as he crossed its boundary, growing heavier, as if the forest itself were watching. He walked for hours, his boots sinking into the soft earth, his eyes darting from one strange flower to another. He sketched furiously in his book, noting the way the vines seemed to twist toward him, the way the light bent unnaturally through the leaves. But the deeper he went, the less certain he became. The paths looped back on themselves. The trees seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, and his compass spun uselessly. By dusk, he was lost, his confidence fraying like an old rope. It was then that he saw her. Ilara stood in a clearing, her cloak blending with the shadows, her eyes fixed on him. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice like the rustle of leaves. Torin stammered, holding up his book as if it were a shield. "I mean no harm," he said. "I only want to understand." Ilara's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Understanding comes at a cost," she said. "What are you willing to pay?" Torin spent the night in her cottage, though he couldn't say how he got there. One moment, they were in the clearing. The next, he was seated by her fire, a cup of bitter tea in his hands. She asked him questions, not about his maps or his studies, but about his dreams, his fears, the things he carried in his heart. He spoke of his childhood in a city of stone, of his father's library, where he'd first read of places like the Grove, of his need to know the world's secrets. Ilara listened, her face unreadable, and when he finished, she said only, "The Grove is not a secret to be known. It is a story to be lived." Over the next days, Torin returned to the Grove, always finding Ilara waiting. She didn't forbid him, but she set him tasks: to carry water from the river, to mend a broken branch, to sit in silence until the birds grew bold enough to perch on his shoulders. He thought these were tests, ways to earn her trust, but Ilara saw them differently. "You're learning to listen," she told him one evening, as they watched the stars through a gap in the canopy. "The Grove speaks, but not in words." Torin began to notice things he hadn't before: the way the trees swayed without wind, the way the flowers turned toward Ilara as she passed. He felt the pulse of the Grove, a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. His sketches grew less precise, more like poetry, lines that captured the curve of a leaf or the weight of silence. He stopped asking questions and started telling stories, ones he didn't know he carried, tales of loss, of wonder, as a world he'd left behind but still longed for. One night, as the fire burned low, Ilara told him her own story. Long ago, she said, the grove had been a place of pilgrimage, a sanctuary where people came to heal or to remember. She had been one of them, a girl with a broken heart, seeking solace. The grove had chosen her, not as a servant, but as a keeper, binding her life to its own. I am its voice, she said, and it is mine. We are one until the end. Torin asked what the end was, but she only smiled and said, You'll know when you feel it. The seasons turned and Torin stayed. The villagers noticed the change in him. His ink-stained hands now calloused, his eyes softer, as if he'd seen something they couldn't. He no longer carried his book, and when they asked him about the grove, he only said, It's alive. They didn't understand, but they stopped fearing Ilara. She was no longer the witch of their stories, but a woman who belonged to the forest as much as it belonged to her. One winter, when the grove lay silent under a blanket of snow, Ilara grew frail. Her steps slowed, her voice grew thin, and the fire in her cottage burned lower each night. Torin tended to her, bringing wood and water, brewing her teas as she'd once done for the villagers. He asked her what was wrong, but she only said, The grove is ready to rest. He didn't understand until the night she called him to the clearing, where they'd first met. The trees were bare, their branches stark against the moonlit sky. Ilara stood in the center, her cloak pooled around her like fallen leaves. The grove chooses its keeper, she said. It chose me, and now it chooses you. Torin protested, saying he wasn't ready, that he didn't know enough. But Ilara shook her head. You've listened, she said. That's enough. She took his hand, and he felt a warmth spread through him, like sunlight after a long winter. The grove hummed, its roots trembling beneath the earth. And for a moment he saw it as she did, not a place, but a living thing, woven from time and memory and care. Ilara's hand slipped from his, and when he looked again, she was gone. In her place stood a sapling, its leaves silver in the moonlight. Torin wept, but not for long. He felt the grove's pulse, stronger now, and knew what he had to do. He returned to the cottage, lit the fire, and began to tend the grove as Ilara had. The villagers noticed the change, the way the flowers bloomed brighter, the way the air felt lighter. They called him the keeper now, though he never spoke of it. He carried Ilara's story and the grove's in his heart. Years passed, and Torin grew old, his hair as silver as Ilara's had been. The grove thrived under his care, its secrets safe, its balance unbroken. And when his time came, as it must for all keepers, he stood in the clearing and felt the grove choose another. He smiled, knowing it would live on, as Ilara had, as he had. The villagers still tell stories of the keeper of the grove, though they no longer fear the forest. They leave their offerings at its edge, and sometimes, when the wind is right, they hear a voice, not Ilara's, not Torin's, but the grove itself, singing of time and memory and the ones who keep it whole.